Well, y'all, Nicki Minaj is back on X, and she's coming for Jay-Z. So in a series of tweets, Nicki Minaj is claiming that Jay-Z owes her 100 to 200 million so far.
What happens when one of the biggest female rappers in the world goes to war with one of the most powerful names in the entire music industry, and nothing happens in return? Nicki Minaj has spent months throwing shots that most artists would never even dare to say out loud. We're talking about accusations involving money, industry control, award show decisions, and even claims that cross into conspiracy-level territory. Every few days, another post, another allegation, another name drop aimed straight at Jay-Z and Roc Nation. But here's where things get strange. In almost any other situation, we would have already seen a lawsuit, a statement, a takedown, something. Because history shows when the machine wants to respond, it responds fast. We saw it before when a TV segment crossed the line, legal teams stepped in, edits were made, apologies were aired. So why is this different? Why is Nicki Minaj still posting, still escalating, still making claims, while the other side stays completely silent? Is this silent strategy or something deeper? And as the situation keeps unfolding in real time, one question is getting louder by the day. What does Nicki Minaj know or believe that's making her feel untouchable in this feud? Because right now, this isn't just a music industry disagreement anymore. It's turning into one of the most unusual and unpredictable standoffs hip-hop has ever seen. And the strange part is, this isn't slowing down. It's actually escalating. Nicki Minaj didn't just randomly wake up and start firing shots. This has been building for years in small waves, but recently it has turned into something much louder, much more direct, and much more public. Every tweet feels like another brick being thrown at a glass wall that hasn't broken yet. She has repeatedly claimed that Jay-Z and Roc Nation owe her a massive financial settlement, with numbers floating between tens of millions and even up to $200 million depending on how she frames it. In her version of events, she believes she had a stake connected to major business deals that were never properly paid out when those assets changed hands. But here's the key issue: none of this has been confirmed in court. And that's where the tension really begins. Because if someone publicly accuses one of the most powerful executives in music of withholding that level of money, the expectation is simple: legal action follows. That's how the industry normally operates. Quiet negotiations behind the scenes, or if that fails, lawyers take over. Instead, nothing like that has happened. No lawsuit, no official rebuttal, no public breakdown of her claims. Just silence. And in high-stakes industry conflicts, silence is never neutral. Silence becomes a statement on its own. Then things took another turn when Nicki Minaj brought the Super Bowl halftime show into the conversation. She suggested that Lil Wayne was intentionally overlooked for the performance and tied that decision back to personal industry politics involving Jay-Z's influence over entertainment partnerships. Now, the Super Bowl is not just a music event. It's a corporate, political, and cultural machine. Decisions like that involve layers of committees, brands, sponsorship deals, and NFL executives. So when she frames it as a personal revenge move, it shifts the narrative into something far more explosive than just creative decisions. But again, no formal response came. No clarification from the NFL through Jay-Z's role in entertainment partnerships. No legal pressure. No media correction campaign. Just more silence. And then came the point where things stopped sounding like industry beef and started sounding like conspiracy-level accusations. During awards season coverage, Nicki Minaj began posting claims that went far beyond contracts or music politics. She referenced ideas about control, manipulation within the entertainment system, and even linked powerful figures in the industry to larger hidden structures behind the scenes. Some of her posts were vague. Others were extremely direct. She mentioned names. She connected dots. She implied intent. And every time she escalated, the public reaction grew louder, but the response from the other side didn't. That's what makes this situation different from typical celebrity disputes. Normally, when accusations reach a certain threshold, the legal system gets involved. Even if the claims are false, reputation management alone usually triggers action. But here, the usual playbook isn't being used. And that creates a vacuum. Because in that vacuum, speculation fills the space. People start asking if there is something being avoided, something being protected, or something that simply doesn't need attention drawn to it. Meanwhile, Nicki Minaj is not stepping back. She is actively framing her narrative as someone being blocked, ignored, or financially wronged by the upper structure of the industry. And whether people agree with her or not, she has managed to keep the entire conversation centered around one core idea: power imbalance. In her framing, this isn't just about money anymore. It's about control. About who gets rewarded, who gets punished, and who gets ignored in an industry where influence matters as much as talent. But here's where things get even more complicated. Because as her accusations grew, so did the backlash around her personal decisions and affiliations. Her recent political appearances, public statements, and online behavior started creating distance between her and parts of her original fan base. Some supporters began questioning her direction. Others defended her fiercely. But the division became visible. And that matters, because in modern entertainment, public perception is part of leverage. At the same time, another layer started forming in the background, industry observers pointing out that Roc Nation has historically taken legal action quickly in other disputes. Bloggers, smaller commentators, and media figures have faced swift consequences when crossing certain lines. So naturally, the question became unavoidable: why is this situation different? Why is one of the loudest ongoing accusations in the music industry not triggering the same response pattern? That question has no official answer, only theories. Some say legal teams are already working quietly behind the scenes. Others believe there is no actionable case to respond to. And then there are people who think responding publicly would only escalate the situation further and give it more attention. But none of that is confirmed. What is confirmed is this: the public exchange is entirely one-sided. Nicki Minaj continues to post, continue to reference, and continue to escalate her claims. And the other side remains silent. In most celebrity conflicts, silence usually doesn't last this long, especially when billion-dollar reputations are involved. The longer it goes on, the more unusual it looks. And that is exactly why this situation has captured so much attention online. Because at this point, it's no longer just about whether her claims are true or false. It's about why this specific conflict is being handled differently from every other public dispute in recent music industry history. And that unanswered question is what keeps pushing this story forward, even when nothing else changes. And as the silence continues, the narrative around this entire situation starts to shift in a very different direction. Because when one side keeps speaking and the other side doesn't respond at all, the conversation stops being balanced. It starts becoming shaped entirely by whoever is still talking. Nicki Minaj has understood that dynamic better than almost anyone in this situation. Instead of backing off, she has leaned further into it. Every few days, another post appears. Another reference. Another reminder that she believes there is an unresolved financial and power dispute sitting underneath the surface of the music industry. And even though there is no official court filing attached to her claims, the repetition itself creates momentum. Online audiences start to treat repeated claims as ongoing narratives, even without verification. That is how perception begins to form. But behind all of that, there is another layer that makes this situation even more complicated: the industry itself. Because Jay-Z is not just an artist in this context. He represents a larger structure of business partnerships, entertainment deals, streaming influence, and corporate relationships that extend far beyond music alone. Roc Nation operates in sports, media, branding, and global entertainment. So any public dispute involving that level of structure doesn't just stay in music headlines. It touches multiple industries at once. That's part of why people expect a response. In most high-profile disputes involving billion-dollar branding ecosystems, silence is rare. Statements are issued to protect investor confidence. Legal teams step in to prevent reputational spread. Even controlled denials are used strategically to stop narratives from expanding. But in this case, the response pattern is different. And that difference is what keeps fueling speculation. Meanwhile, Nicki Minaj continues to frame her situation as a long-term grievance rather than a short-term dispute. She references past deals, past decisions, and past industry moments as if they are all connected to a larger, unresolved structure. To her supporters, this looks like someone pushing against a system she believes is unfair. To critics, it looks like escalation without legal grounding. But either way, the conversation keeps growing. And the longer it grows, the more unrelated topics start getting pulled into it. At one point, discussions around award shows, music rankings, and industry politics begin to blend into her narrative. Every major event becomes another reference point. Every decision becomes another possible example of bias or imbalance in her interpretation. That is how the situation expands beyond a single issue. It becomes a framework. And once something becomes a framework in public discourse, it becomes harder to contain. At the same time, Jay-Z's side remains publicly silent, which creates a contrast that people constantly point out online. Because historically, Roc Nation and associated teams have responded quickly in other disputes involving media claims, bloggers, and smaller industry voices. So the absence of response here becomes the main topic itself. Not just the accusations, but the silence around them. And that is where the debate becomes divided. One group believes silence is strategic. In their view, responding would validate the conversation and give it more oxygen. They argue that ignoring unverified claims is the most effective way to prevent escalation. Another group believes silence is unusual at this scale. They argue that when claims involve financial allegations, reputational damage, and public accusations tied to major institutions, a response is expected if only to correct public record. Neither side has proof of intent, but both sides have interpretations. Meanwhile, Nicki Minaj continues to operate in public view, shaping the narrative in real time. She does not rely on traditional press statements or controlled interviews. Instead, she uses direct social media communication, which removes filters between message and audience. That method has power, but it also removes structure. And in high-stakes disputes, structure usually matters. As this continues, another layer enters the conversation: audience fatigue versus audience curiosity. Some people begin to tune out, treating the feud as ongoing entertainment noise. Others become more engaged precisely because of the unpredictability. The lack of resolution creates a loop where people keep checking for the next update, expecting a turning point that never fully arrives. That loop is what keeps the topic alive. Not resolution, but anticipation. And as long as anticipation exists, the story continues. Even without official developments. Even without confirmation. Even without closure. At this stage, the situation is no longer just about money claims, industry influence, or personal disputes. It has evolved into something more complex, a public standoff between narrative control and institutional silence. One side is actively speaking. The other side is refusing to enter the conversation publicly. And in between those two positions, the audience is left trying to interpret meaning from absence. But absence is not evidence. And that is the core tension running through the entire situation. Because the more silence continues, the more people project meaning onto it. And the more claims are repeated, the more they circulate regardless of verification. So the real question is no longer just what is true. It becomes, what happens when one narrative keeps expanding and the other never responds? And as of now, there is no clear answer. Only escalation on one side, and silence on the other. And that's where things start to feel less like a typical celebrity feud, and more like a slow-burning standoff with no clear exit point. Because at this stage, the story is no longer moving through official statements or verified facts. It is moving through perception, repetition, and silence. And in situations like this, the audience often becomes the final judge, even without full information. Nicki Minaj continues to speak as if she is building a case in public view. Each post adds another layer to her argument. Whether it is financial claims, industry decisions, or broader accusations about influence and control, She presents it as one continuous thread rather than isolated incidents. And that consistency is what keeps the conversation alive. Even people who disagree with her find themselves following the updates, because the unpredictability makes it feel like something major could break at any moment. But on the other side, the response remains unchanged. Still nothing public. Still no visible legal action. Still no formal breakdown of her claims. And that silence continues to raise questions across social media spaces, podcasts, and commentary channels. Because in most high-profile disputes, silence usually has a time limit. At some point, someone responds. But here, the timeline keeps extending. And the longer it extends, the more interpretations begin to form around it. Some people see strategy. They believe ignoring the situation prevents it from gaining legitimacy. In their view, responding would turn allegations into a larger media cycle that benefits the accuser more than the accused. Others see something very different. They argue that when claims become this public and this persistent, silence can start to look like avoidance rather than strategy. But neither interpretation can be confirmed, because no one on the record is explaining it. And that absence of clarity is what fuels the speculation. Meanwhile, Nicki Minaj continues to position herself as someone challenging a system rather than an individual. In her framing, this is not just about one deal or one disagreement. It is about how the industry operates, how decisions are made, and who benefits from those decisions. That framing is important because it expands the scope of the conflict beyond personal grievance. It becomes structural criticism. And structural criticism is harder to contain because it invites broader public debate. At the same time, the industry she is speaking about is not static. It is deeply interconnected. Music, sports, branding, streaming, live events, and corporate partnerships all overlap. Rock Nation sits at the center of multiple layers of that ecosystem, which means any public dispute involving that structure naturally spreads wider than music headlines. It becomes a conversation about influence. And influence is always harder to define than contracts. As this continues, another dynamic becomes visible: the gap between legal action and public narrative. In traditional disputes, legal action defines boundaries. It determines what can be said publicly and what becomes a matter of record. But in this case, there is no visible legal framework shaping the conversation. So the narrative is being shaped entirely in public space. That creates a unique imbalance, because whoever is speaking more effectively controls perception. And in this situation, one side is actively speaking while the other remains publicly absent. That imbalance is what makes the story feel unresolved. At the same time, audiences begin to split into different camps. Some view Nicki Minaj's continued posts as justified frustration from someone challenging a powerful structure. Others view it as escalation without formal validation. And both groups are reacting to the same information, but interpreting it differently based on trust, bias, and perspective. That is how modern public disputes evolve. Not through resolution, but through interpretation wars. And as time passes, the lack of closure becomes the most dominant feature of the entire situation. Not the claims themselves, but the fact that nothing has ended them. Even moments that could have shifted the narrative, award shows, interviews, industry events, pass without any direct confrontation or resolution. Instead, the conversation resets each time and continues from the same unresolved point. And that is why the story keeps resurfacing. Because there is no final answer anchoring it, only continuation. At this stage, the most important question is no longer just about the original claims. It is about trajectory. Where does a situation like this go when it never fully stops, but also never fully resolves? Does it eventually fade out through audience fatigue? Does it escalate into formal legal action later? Or does it remain in this permanent state of public tension where neither side fully closes the chapter? Right now, there is no indicator pointing to a clear ending. Nicki Minaj continues to reference her grievances publicly. The other side continues to remain silent. And the audience continues to analyze every new development for meaning. But meaning without resolution always stays open-ended. And open-ended narratives tend to evolve on their own. So unless something changes legally, publicly, or structurally, this situation is likely to remain exactly what it is now, a high-profile standoff. One side speaking, one side silent, and millions watching, waiting for the moment that finally breaks the pattern. But until that moment arrives, all anyone can do is interpret what is already in front of them and decide what they believe. Because in this story, the truth is not just about what is said, it is also about what is never said at all. So now it all comes down to one thing. Is Nicki Minaj really exposing something deeper happening inside the music industry, or is this just a public feud that has spiraled way beyond control? Because on one side, you've got non-stop accusations, bold claims, and constant escalation. And on the other side, complete silence. No statements, no lawsuit, no clear response. And that silence is exactly what's keeping this story alive. Now I want to know what you think. Do you believe Jay-Z's camp is staying quiet because they're protecting something, or because there's nothing to respond to at all? And where do you see this going next? Does it finally explode into legal action, or just fade into more online chaos? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this one is getting bigger every time it's ignored.